Steven Spielberg's name is sewn into the very fabric of contemporary film. From Jaws to E.T., from Schindler's List to Saving Private Ryan, his movies established not just box office periods, but generations. He is renowned for eliciting performances that remain, moments that seem as though they could not have been crafted by any other person. But even the best directors have scars from decisions they would erase. Casting is trust. It is vision. And when that trust breaks, even a master like Spielberg feels the fissures. He has talked, sometimes openly and sometimes hesitantly, about actors who didn't work, about parts that warped the beat of his movies, and about choices that nagged him years after the cameras turned off. These regrets are not about misplaced talent. They're about chemistry lost, trust betrayed, or performances that didn't meet the expectations he framed around them. Here are the 5 actors Steven Spielberg has admitted, quietly or explicitly, he wished he hadn't cast, and what their tales say about the impermanence of film legacy. Number 1. Dustin Hoffman. When Spielberg collaborated with Dustin Hoffman on Hook for the first time, the combination felt like fate, one of the best living actors taking on Captain Hook's flamboyant role. However, the production was anything but smooth. Hoffman, notorious for his intensity and single-minded attention to detail, conflicted with Spielberg's pace. The director had envisioned a playful but dark children's fantasy. Hoffman turned toward Shakespearean gravitas, extrapolating scenes that Spielberg wished to be swift and lighthearted. Spielberg went on to acknowledge that the tension had made the shoot heavier than it had to be. What should have been magic was too often a struggle of wills. Transformation was the hallmark of Hoffman's career. From The Graduate through Rain Man, he was renowned for vanishing in characters with meticulous preparation. Spielberg respected that commitment, but in Hook, it turned into a double-edged blade. Hoffman sought layers and complexity in a movie Spielberg was crafting as a fairy tale adventure. The actor frequently requested multiple takes, running long on the shoot and sucking the life out of the days. Spielberg once said that Hoffman was pursuing a Shakespearean villain within a children's fable, and the tones were yanking apart. For Spielberg, the battle was over tone. Hook required a villain who could frighten children and entrance them in equal proportion, a threat that would also wink at the audience. Hoffman's style relied heavily on darkness, overpowering the playfulness of Robin Williams' Peter Pan at times. Spielberg afterwards conceded that the mood on set became taut, as Hoffman's gravitas drew the film away from the lightness he envisioned. Hoffman himself described speaking with divided sentiments, admiring Spielberg's genius, but noting that their approaches were not always congruent. Spielberg reciprocally saw Hoffman's ability with a qualification. Occasionally, the character needs to be simple, and Dustin was constantly seeking depth. What Spielberg required was rhythm and humor. What Hoffman gave him was weight and shadow. The last of these left people polarized. Some praise Hoffman as the best part, while others criticize him as dragging down a slow movie to begin with. Spielberg has since labeled Hook one of his more problematical films, citing misjudgments in casting and tone. The irony was that Hoffman's brilliance was never in question. He dominated so thoroughly that he reworked the film around him, and Spielberg struggled to contain a performance he could not fully control. Number 2. Shia LaBeouf. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was already saddled with unreasonable expectations. Spielberg hoped Shia LaBeouf might tap into some younger sense of adventure and assume the indie mantle. Instead, the actor's off-screen rebellion was incorporated into the film. Following the release of the movie, LaBeouf openly criticized both the movie and himself, describing it as a flop. Spielberg reacted with quiet dismay, observing that the loyalty of an actor needed to go further than the stage. It was a public disagreement between director and star that was so unusual, one that left Spielberg wistful about the trust he had invested. The movie was designed to cross generations. Harrison Ford reprising the legendary archaeologist, and LaBeouf as Mutt Williams, a potential heir. On paper, the concept had potential, but on location, the chemistry failed to click. Ford's earthy demeanor clashed with LaBeouf's swagger, both in character and in real life. Spielberg later said that LaBeouf had talent but lacked restraint, explaining that when you speak against the movie you made, you speak against the family that made it with you. LaBeouf's on-the-record comments hurt. In interviews, he conceded he dropped the ball on the heritage of Indiana Jones. For Spielberg, it wasn't the admission of failure that was painful. It was the choice to make it public. Loyalty was everything to him. For decades, he had defended actors, insulated them from critics, and presented their work in the best possible context. LaBeouf's candor, either spontaneous or genuine, shattered that tacit understanding. Behind the scenes, the tension was palpable. Crew members wrote of LaBeouf's intensity, sometimes motivating, sometimes distracting. Spielberg prized precision and teamwork, qualities that fueled his greatest ensembles. LaBeouf tended to bring instability instead, raw energy that didn't always complement the greater good. What Spielberg envisioned as a passing of the torch moment became a cautionary tale about youth casting for legacy. The fallout persisted. LaBeouf continued to generate headlines for personal demons and provocative ventures. Ford and Spielberg continued to be circumspect in what they said publicly, but rumors within the industry were that quietly. Plans to continue the franchise with Mutt Williams at its core were shelved. The remorse, in this instance, wasn't the product of insufficient talent. It was the product of shattered trust. For Spielberg, the adventure intended to pass the baton actually snuffed it out. Number 3. Julia Roberts. Spielberg had another surprise on the same set of Hook, Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell. Roberts was America's sweetheart at the time, radiant, box office, and adored. During filming, however, personal strife and tabloid madness trailed her onto set. Spielberg subsequently admitted that her performance had not had the joy he had envisioned for the character, and that her energy conflicted with the delicate fantasy he was creating. He stood up for her in public, but in private accepted that she had been miscast. Roberts herself subsequently acknowledged that she was miserable during filming, cementing the feeling of regret for both director and actress. The casting was ideal on paper. Roberts' charm had characterized Pretty Woman and established her as Hollywood's most prized star. But for Hook, the part of Tinkerbell needed something else: playfulness, lightness, and mischief. Spielberg envisioned her as the spark to counterbalance Robin Williams' manic Peter Pan and Dustin Hoffman's authoritative Captain Hook. But from the start, Roberts had a tough time finding her pace. Spielberg has explained, "I think Julia was going through a very tough time, and it showed in the work." Adding to the problems was the glare of publicity. Roberts was going through a very public breakup while working on the film, and the tabloids dogged her every move. For a director who prized continuity on set, the constant barrage of tabloid rumble generated distraction and tension. Crew members remembered that Spielberg regularly shifted the schedule to suit her temper, trying to keep peace on a shoot already strained by elaborate visual effects. On screen, Roberts glided through complicated sequences as Tinkerbell, but Spielberg felt she lacked energy. Critics also complained of her performance being subdued in a film already creaking under tonal strain. Many years later, Spielberg said, "Tinkerbell needed pure joy. What we had instead was someone burdened by circumstance." In spite of all the difficulties, he strongly defended Roberts during promotion, hailing her dedication and work under stressful conditions. Roberts herself went on to admit that she felt alone on set. Much of her work was shot independently because of the magnitude of the effects. That loneliness intensified the emotional distance between her performance and the cast around her. In retrospect, the disappointment wasn't about Roberts' talent. She was still one of the defining actresses of her generation. It was tone. Spielberg required lightness and magic. Roberts provided intensity and vulnerability. The incompatibility served to highlight how even the brightest star can struggle when placed under the wrong type of light. Number 4. Christian Bale. When Spielberg cast Christian Bale as a young lad in Empire of the Sun, he was presenting the world with a talent that would later become legendary. But then Spielberg was scared that he had stretched too far. Bale's uncooked talent was undeniable, but Spielberg acknowledged feeling almost exploitative about guiding a child into such emotionally ruinous territory. Although he greatly admired Bale's work, he subsequently admitted to wondering if he had placed too much burden on the shoulders of a boy. It wasn't regret of ability, but regret of duty. The film, which takes place during the tumult of war-torn Shanghai, required superhuman emotional range from its star. Bale, who was just a boy, carried almost every moment of the 2.5-hour epic. He screamed, cried, and survived some scenes of cinematic savagery that would have tried out seasoned professionals. Spielberg later remembered that Bale's intensity surprised him. Christian had a discipline way beyond his years, but I wondered if I was asking too much, too soon of him. The shoot was intense, filmed over several international locations. Whereas the adult cast possessed the chops to handle endless shoots and heavy material, Bale was thrown into the midst of it. Companions observed how Spielberg tended to temper his direction with the kid, attempting to balance the needs of the narrative against the desire to shield his child star. But Bale gave a performance which critics called outstanding, the innocence and toughness of a war-surviving kid. Most claimed that he drove the whole movie. Spielberg himself confirmed that Bale had surpassed everyone's expectations, but admiration came hand in hand with unease. In subsequent interviews, he spoke of moments of uncertainty, claiming that there were times when he wondered if he had crossed the line from guidance to exploitation. Pressure on Bale became a point of quiet regret. For Bale, it was defining. It served to launch his career and unleashed a ferocity that would characterize later work, such as Batman and Patrick Bateman. But even he called the shoot overwhelming. Spielberg himself once admitted, "When I saw the film afterwards, I was proud of him, but also ashamed at what I had demanded of him." That combination of pride and shame colored the experience long after the final credits. In Spielberg's body of work, Empire of the Sun is one of his most beautiful and emotionally conflicted films. But beneath its beauty was a personal reckoning, the epiphany that brilliance is not free. Number 5. Richard Dreyfuss. Spielberg's co-creation with Richard Dreyfuss on Jaws, and then Close Encounters of the Third Kind yielded some of cinema's most memorable performances. Behind the scenes, however, the professional relationship was troubled. Dreyfuss was hot-headed, volatile, and sometimes argumentative, wearing out Spielberg's patience during both productions. Spielberg afterward remembered that whereas Dreyfuss ignited lightning on the screen, the storms behind the scenes almost destroyed the productions. Their friendship eventually mellowed out, but the memory of these confrontations made Spielberg wary. Twice casting Dreyfuss was evidence of admiration and evidence of regret. During Jaws, tension erupted almost from the outset. The shoot was turbulent, beset with delays, a broken mechanical shark, and running over budget. Amidst all that tension, Dreyfuss incessantly challenged Spielberg, second-guessing directions and ad-libbing lines. Spielberg confessed years later, Richard was terrific, but he was also mercurial. Some days, he gave me everything. Other days, he gave me war. For a new director, still testing his skills, those struggles were draining. But the performance that did evolve, taut, acerbic, vibrant, grounded the film and made it iconic. By the time of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg might have gone elsewhere for an actor. Instead, he went back to Dreyfuss, thinking his intensity could sustain a film about obsession and awe. The risk worked on film, but on set, sparks again flew. Cast members remembered explosive arguments, with Dreyfuss insisting on greater freedom and Spielberg resisting loss of control. It was a creative battle that held up production, but also gave Dreyfuss's raw energy its spark. For Spielberg, the dilemma was bittersweet. Dreyfuss raised his movies, but drained his stamina. In an interview he reflected, "Sometimes the hardest people to work with are the ones who leave the deepest mark on your art." That quote encapsulated both his appreciation and his remorse. Collaborating with Dreyfuss had created unforgettable film, but at a toll he bore for years. Their own relationship softened over time. The hard angles of youth wore off into friendship, and both men would speak fondly of one another in later years. But Spielberg only repeated the collaboration a few times, a subtle indication that the past had been scarring. To cast Dreyfuss twice was at once an admission of genius and a warning against the destructive power of genius. In Spielberg's honor, Dreyfuss was both muse and tempest. Together, they etched out moments that defined contemporary cinema. But the experience did leave Spielberg cautious, evidence that even lightning can scorch if you hold on too long. Spielberg's regrets are a reminder that even the best directors are bound by delicate decisions. Casting is not merely a matter of talent. It's about trust, chemistry, and timing. With every role that becomes iconic, there are others that show the price of misfitting, the times when vision and performance simply fail to align. These anecdotes are not condemnations of the actors, nor failures on their part. They are reminders that art is human. Spielberg's introspection reveals to us that even masterpieces consist of compromises, second thoughts, and doubts. The regrets he has are also part of the same path that yielded his successes. Ultimately, film is a delicate collaboration, part brilliance, part luck, part combat. Spielberg's candor about his mistakes makes his legacy all the more human. Which of these casting tales shocked you the most? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to subscribe for more Hollywood's untold history.